A dying horse shares an emotional goodbye with its owner, leaving her heartbroken and unsure how to move forward. But just when it seems like the story is over, the vet does something completely unexpected, something that changes everything. What could possibly follow such a devastating farewell? And how does one final act bring hope where there was only heartbreak? This is a story of love, loss, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their animals that you won't want to miss. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The morning mist hung like a delicate veil over the paddocks as Sophia stepped onto her worn wooden porch. Her coffee steamed in the cool air, matching the soft clouds that escaped Starfire's nostrils as he grazed peacefully in the distance. The rising sun painted everything in gentle golden hues, making her cherished horse's chestnut coat gleam like polished copper. "Morning, old friend," she whispered, though he was too far to hear. Watching him move with such natural grace, even after all these years, brought a smile to her face. But it faded slightly as she noticed the touch of gray around his muzzle, catching the early light. Later that morning, the peaceful scene gave way to focused intensity. Sophia guided Starfire through their training routine, her body moving in perfect sync with his powerful strides. The familiar rhythm of hoofbeats against packed earth filled the air as they circled the practice track. "Come on, boy," she encouraged as they approached a jump. Starfire cleared it beautifully, but Sophia noticed his landing wasn't as smooth as usual. Still, she pressed on, determined to perfect their routine. "Hey, sis," Maddie's voice called from the fence. "Take a break for a minute." Sophia circled Starfire around, barely glancing at her sister. "We need to get this sequence right. The championship's in 2 weeks. Maddie held up an old photograph, its edges worn with time. "Look what I found. Remember your first competition together?" "Not now, Maddie," Sophia said, turning Starfire back toward the track. "We need to focus." "You're pushing too hard," Maddie's concerned voice followed her, but Sophia was already urging Starfire into a canter. As evening settled over the farm, Sophia worked methodically in Starfire's stall, the familiar motions of cleaning bringing a sense of peace after the intense training session. The sweet smell of fresh hay filled the air as she spread it across the floor. Starfire shifted his weight, and something caught her eye. A slight tremor ran through his back leg, barely noticeable in the dim light. Sophia paused, watching carefully as it happened again. "Just tired from training, aren't you, boy?" she murmured, running her hand along his leg. The muscle felt warm under her touch. Starfire nickered softly, nudging her shoulder with his nose. "We'll take it easier tomorrow," she promised, though her mind was already racing ahead to their training schedule. "And I'll have Dr. Miller check you out after the race. A little rest will fix you right up." She gave his neck a final pat before closing the stall door, trying to ignore the tiny voice of worry in the back of her mind. They had a championship to win after all. The next morning dawned gray and humid, the air hanging thick around the stables. Sophia led Starfire from his stall, noticing how he moved more slowly than usual. His usual eager steps were replaced by careful, measured movements. "Come on, boy, just a light workout today," she said, patting his neck. The sound of tires on gravel made her turn to see Maddie's old pickup pulling into the drive. "Morning," Maddie called out, climbing down from her truck with a paper bag in hand. "Brought you some fresh blueberry muffins. They're still warm." Sophia forced a smile. "Thanks, but we're just heading out for a ride." "Perfect timing for a break then," Maddie said, following her sister to the practice area. She leaned against the fence, watching as Sophia adjusted Starfire's saddle. "You know, maybe you should give him a few days off. He's not looking quite himself." "He's fine," Sophia replied. though she couldn't help noticing how Starfire's head hung slightly lower than usual. Just needs to warm up properly. Maddie set the bag of muffins on the fence post. Sophia, he's 23. That's getting up there for a competition horse. Maybe it's time to let him enjoy his retirement. He's already won so many ribbons for you. You don't understand, Sophia snapped, turning to face her sister. This championship could set us up for the international circuit. We're so close to everything we've worked for. We? Maddie's voice was gentle, but firm. Or you, because from where I'm standing, Starfire's given you everything he has. He doesn't need to prove anything else. What would you know about it? Sophia's words came out sharp and defensive. You've never competed at this level. You don't understand what's at stake here. This is my career, Maddie. My whole life. That's exactly what worries me, Maddie said softly. Just go, Sophia said, mounting Starfire with quick, angry movements. I know what I'm doing. She urged Starfire into a trot, then a canter, ignoring Maddie's concerned gaze. The familiar rhythm of hoofbeats against earth usually calmed her, but today it felt off-tempo, slightly irregular. Let's show her what we can do, Sophia muttered, steering Starfire toward a low jump. It was barely 3 feet high. They'd cleared much bigger obstacles hundreds of times before. Starfire gathered himself for the jump, but something was wrong. His takeoff lacked its usual power, and his landing was clumsy, his front leg buckling slightly before he caught himself. Sophia's heart leapt into her throat as she steadied them both. It's nothing, she said aloud, patting Starfire's neck with trembling hands. Just a bad jump, that's all it was. But the worry she'd been pushing away crept closer, harder to ignore with each passing moment. The Wednesday morning sun cast long shadows across the stable yard as Sophia moved through her usual routine. The familiar sounds of horses nickering and stable hands calling out morning greetings filled the air. She checked her clipboard, marking off tasks as she supervised the daily operations. Morning feed for paddock 3, she called out to Tommy, one of the stable hands. All done, Miss Brooks, he replied, wheeling an empty cart past her. Sophia made her way to Starfire's stall, where his morning oats waited in their usual blue bucket. He stood in the corner, his head lower than normal, but perked up slightly at her approach. There's my champion, she said softly, setting the bucket down. Starfire moved toward his breakfast, but without his usual enthusiasm. He took a few bites, then paused, before continuing more slowly. Sophia frowned but pushed the worry aside. Just saving your energy, right, boy? She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her competition checklist. We need to arrange the trailer for next week, and I should probably book that hotel near the grounds. Later that afternoon, Sophia stood at the fence of the back paddock, watching Starfire graze in the autumn sunlight. She'd given him a lighter day, telling herself it was just pre-competition rest. The registration papers for the championship sat half-completed on her office desk. Something about Starfire's movement caught her eye. He lifted his head suddenly, swaying slightly. Before Sophia could process what was happening, his front legs buckled. Starfire! The clipboard clattered to the ground as she vaulted over the fence. Her boots pounded against the grass as she ran to him. Starfire had collapsed onto his knees, his breathing heavy and irregular. He tried to push himself up, his legs trembling with the effort, but couldn't manage it. No, Sophia whispered, her hands shaking as she reached for him. She stroked his neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath his skin. It's okay, boy. You're okay. But he wasn't okay. Another attempt to stand ended with him sinking back to the ground, his eyes wide with fear. Sophia fumbled for her phone, her vision blurring with tears as she scrolled to Dr. Lila's number. The call connected after 2 rings. Dr. Lila, it's Sophia Brooks. Please, I need you to come right away. It's Starfire. He's collapsed in the paddock. He can't get up." "I'm on my way, doctor," Lila's calm voice replied. "Keep him as still as possible. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Sophia sank to her knees beside Starfire, running her fingers through his mane. "Help is coming," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Doctor, Lila's coming. Just stay still." The minutes crawled by like hours. Sophia kept her hand on Starfire's neck, feeling each labored breath. Her mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. The competition schedule, the training plans, all of it seemed meaningless now as she watched her beloved partner struggle to breathe normally. "Please," she whispered, pressing her forehead against his neck. "Please be okay." The rumble of Dr. Lila's truck announced her arrival just as the sun painted the sky in deep orange hues. She stepped out with her medical bag, her face composed, but her stride purposeful as she made her way to where Starfire lay in the paddock. "How long has he been down?" Dr. Lila asked, kneeling beside the horse. "About 20 minutes, Sophia replied, her voice tight with worry. She watched as Dr. Lila ran practiced hands along Starfire's legs and neck, checking vital signs and responses. Starfire remained still during the examination, his breathing steadier now, but still labored. His dark eyes followed Dr. Lila's movements, showing a calmness that somehow made Sophia even more anxious. "His heart rate is elevated," Dr. Lila murmured, pressing her stethoscope to different points on Starfire's chest. She pulled out several vials and a needle from her bag. "I'm going to take some blood samples. This could be more than just fatigue or age-related issues." Sophia's stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" "There are several conditions that could cause a collapse like this," Dr. Lila explained as she drew blood from Starfire's neck with gentle efficiency. "Some of them are treatable, but we need to know what we're dealing with. Until we get these results back, he needs complete rest. No training, no exercise, just quiet time in his stall." "But the championship," Sophia started. Dr. Lila's eyes met hers firmly. "Sophia, that's not even a consideration right now. We need to focus on his health." Later that night, Sophia sat on a hay bale in Starfire's stall, watching him rest. They'd managed to get him back to the stable with help from the farmhands, and he now lay on fresh bedding, his breathing more regular, but still not quite right. The stable was quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of hooves and soft nickering from other horses. Sophia's mind raced through every decision she'd made over the past weeks. The increased training sessions, the extra jumps, pushing through when she'd noticed his fatigue. "I'm sorry," she whispered, reaching out to stroke his neck. "I should have listened to Maddie. Should have noticed something was wrong sooner." Yet even as guilt gnawed at her, she couldn't help glancing at the calendar hanging on the stable wall, mentally calculating the days until the championship. Maybe if the blood tests came back okay, if they took it easy for just a few days, they could still make it work. Starfire shifted slightly, letting out a soft breath that seemed to carry the weight of all their years together. Sophia's hand trembled as she continued stroking his neck, torn between what she wanted and what she feared he needed. Golden rays of morning sunlight filtered through the stable windows, casting long shadows across the hay-strewn floor. Sophia stirred from her makeshift bed in the hay pile, her muscles stiff from sleeping in the awkward position. She'd spent the entire night beside Starfire, unable to leave him alone after yesterday's scare. "Hey boy," she whispered, her voice rough from sleep. Starfire remained lying down, but lifted his head at the sound of her voice, gently nudging her hand with his soft muzzle. His eyes seemed clearer this morning, though he made no attempt to stand. Her phone buzzed. "Doctor!" Lila's name flashing on the screen. Sophia's heart jumped as she answered. "The lab is still processing the blood work. Dr. Lila said, her tone professional but gentle. "I know you're worried, but I cannot stress this enough. Starfire needs complete rest. No movement unless absolutely necessary." Before Sophia could respond, the stable door creaked open. Maddie walked in carrying 2 grocery bags, her boots crunching on the scattered hay. "I brought some supplies," Maddie said softly, setting down the bags. "And breakfast for you. You need to keep your strength up, too." Sophia nodded stiffly, still raw from their previous disagreements. "Thanks." "Have you thought about what you'll do about the championship?" Maddie asked, her voice careful. "There's nothing to think about yet," Sophia replied sharply. "We don't even know what's wrong." Maddie sighed, leaning against the stall door. "Soph, I know how much this means to you, but maybe it's time to start thinking beyond the race. Starfire's health dash." "Don't." Sophia cut her off, standing up abruptly. "You don't understand what this means to me, what he means to me. This isn't just about a race." "I'm trying to help." "Well, you're not," Sophia snapped. "You've never understood our connection. Starfire and I, we're a team. We always have been." Maddie's face fell, but she stepped back, recognizing the futility of pushing further. "Just call if you need anything," she said quietly, before leaving. As evening approached, Sophia's stomach growled loudly enough that she couldn't ignore it anymore. After checking Starfire's water and hay one last time, she reluctantly walked back to her small farmhouse. In the kitchen, she mechanically heated up the soup Maddie had brought, her eyes fixed on the dark paddock visible through the window. The empty space where Starfire should be grazing seemed to mock her. Her phone lay silent. No updates from Dr. Lila. No return calls about the upcoming competition. Sophia pulled out her calendar and began crossing off appointments and training sessions for the next week. Everything could wait. Right now, nothing mattered except making sure Starfire was okay. The morning dew still clung to the grass as Maddie's truck pulled up to the stable. Through the open door, she could see Sophia methodically brushing Starfire's mane, her movements gentle and practiced. The horse remained lying down, but his ears perked up at each word Sophia whispered. "I know you're tired, boy," Sophia murmured, running the brush through his silver-streaked mane, "but we've got so much more to do together. You just need to get better." Maddie stood in the doorway, her heart heavy as she watched her sister's tender care mixed with desperate hope. After a moment, she cleared her throat softly. "Hey," Maddie said, stepping into the stable. Sophia barely glanced up. "If you're here to lecture me again—" "I'm here because I care about both of you," Maddie interrupted, moving closer to the stall. "And we need to talk, really talk, about what's happening here." "Nothing's happening. We're just waiting for the test results." Maddie shook her head, her voice firm but kind. "You're pushing him too hard, Sophia. You have been for months. I've watched you ignore the signs because you're so focused on winning." "That's not fair," Sophia protested, but Maddie pressed on. "Remember when we were kids? How we'd spend hours just riding through the back fields, no competitions, no pressure?" Maddie's eyes grew distant with the memory. "You used to love that. When did winning become more important than Starfire's well-being?" Sophia's hand stilled on the brush. "Don't you dare suggest I don't care about his well-being." "Then prove it," Maddie challenged. "Let me take over his care. I can make sure he gets the rest he needs without—" "Without what?" Sophia whirled around, her voice rising. "Without my ambition getting in the way? Is that what you think?" "Yes." Maddie threw up her hands. "That's exactly what I think. You're so caught up in your next victory that you can't see what it's doing to him." "Get out!" Sophia's voice trembled with anger. "Sophia! I said get out!" Sophia stormed past her sister, shoving the stable door open with enough force to make it bang against the wall. Maddie followed her outside, calling after her. "I'll be back when you're ready to have a real conversation about this. He deserves better than being run into the ground for your dreams." After Maddie's truck disappeared down the driveway, Sophia slumped against the stable wall. Her hands shook as she pulled an old photograph from her jacket pocket. Her and Starfire at their first championship. Both of them younger, his coat gleaming in the sun as she held their trophy high. Tears splashed onto the worn surface as she slid down to sit in the dirt, clutching the photo to her chest. The morning sun filtered through the stable windows as Sophia's phone buzzed in her pocket. Dr. Lila's name flashed across the screen. Standing next to Starfire's stall, Sophia's hands trembled as she answered the call. "Hello?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Starfire lifted his head slightly from where he lay, his dark eyes fixed on Sophia. She reached through the stall bars to touch his neck, seeking comfort in the familiar warmth of his coat. "Sophia," Dr. Lila's voice was gentle but serious. "I have Starfire's test results." Sophia's throat tightened. "How bad is it?" "I'm afraid it's not good news." Dr. Lila paused briefly. "Starfire has a previously undiagnosed heart condition. The tests show significant deterioration of his heart muscle." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sophia's feet. She gripped the stall door to steady herself. "But how? He's always been so strong." "These conditions can be subtle at first," Dr. Lila explained. "I want to be clear. This isn't your fault. It's something he may have had for years, but the strain of competition has accelerated its progression." Sophia slid down to sit on the stable floor, her back against Starfire's stall. "Can we treat it? Get him back to competing?" Sophia ... Dr. Lila's voice softened further. "I need you to understand. Starfire can't compete anymore. Any significant physical exertion could be dangerous for him now. At this point, our priority needs to be keeping him comfortable for whatever time he has left." The phone nearly slipped from Sophia's grasp. She stared at Starfire, who gazed back at her with the same trusting eyes she'd known for years. Memories flooded her mind. Their first show together, countless early morning practices, the way he always seemed to know exactly when she needed him most. How long?" Sophia managed to ask. "It's hard to say exactly. With proper care and rest, he could have months of quality life ahead, but he needs to take it easy now." After ending the call, Sophia crawled into Starfire's stall. She settled beside him, running her fingers through his mane, the way she had thousands of times before. Each stroke brought back another memory, the thrill of their first championship win, quiet moments in the practice ring, the pride she'd felt watching him master new jumps. Hours passed as Sophia sat with Starfire, the sunlight slowly fading from the stable windows. Her mind kept circling back to all their planned competitions, the dreams they'd never fulfill now. More than that, she struggled with the knowledge that her competitive career, the only life she'd known for so long, was effectively over. That night, Sophia lay in bed, wide awake despite her exhaustion. The ceiling offered no answers as she stared up at it, her thoughts a tangled mess of memories and regrets. She could still feel Starfire's warm breath against her palm, still see the gentle trust in his eyes, the same trust he'd always given her, even now when everything was falling apart. The morning light cast long shadows across Sophia's kitchen as her phone lit up with a message. It was from Maddie. "How's Starfire doing today?" Sophia picked up the phone several times, her fingers hovering over the keyboard before setting it back down. Each time she read the message, guilt and uncertainty twisted in her stomach. A sound from the stable caught her attention. Through the kitchen window, she could see Starfire attempting to stand in his stall. Despite his weakened state, His eyes held that familiar, determined gleam she'd always loved. His legs trembled with effort, but he kept trying. "Oh, Star," she whispered, hurrying out to the stable. Watching him struggle stirred something in her. His fighting spirit, even now, touched her deeply. "How about a little walk, boy?" she suggested softly, grabbing his halter from its hook. Together, they made their way slowly to the paddock. Starfire's steps were careful but steady, and Sophia matched his pace. The morning dew still clung to the grass, catching the sunlight like tiny diamonds. As they walked, memories washed over her. Early morning training sessions when Starfire was young, learning each other's rhythms, building trust with every ride. "Remember when you wouldn't let anyone else catch you in this paddock," Sophia said, patting his neck. "Took me 3 weeks of bringing you carrots before you'd come to me." The crunch of gravel announced another presence. Sophia turned to see Maddie walking toward them, her expression gentle. Instead of speaking, Maddie fell into step beside them, maintaining a respectful silence as they completed their slow circuit of the paddock. When they reached the stable entrance, Maddie finally spoke. "I brought something for you." She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather-bound book. "I've been keeping this for years." Sophia recognized it immediately, the scrapbook Maddie had started when they were teens. Her sister held it out to her. "It's not about the ribbons or medals, Soph," Maddie said softly. "Look through it when you're ready. Remember why you started riding in the first place." Sophia took the book without a word, her throat too tight to speak. Maddie squeezed her shoulder gently before leaving. That evening, after settling Starfire for the night, Sophia curled up in her favorite armchair with the scrapbook. As she opened it, tears began falling freely. There they were, photos of her first riding lesson, Starfire as a young horse, the two of them learning together. Not a single competition photo in sight. Instead, page after page showed moments of pure joy. Sophia braiding Starfire's mane, both of them covered in mud after a rainy day's ride. Quiet moments of connection that had nothing to do with winning. Her tears fell onto the plastic-covered pages as she realized what Maddie had been trying to tell her all along. The stable was quiet, except for the soft rustling of hay and Starfire's gentle breathing. Sophia sat cross-legged beside him, her fingers moving rhythmically through his dark mane. The evening light filtered through the stable windows, casting a warm glow over them both. "Remember our first big competition, Star?" she whispered, smiling at the memory. "You were so nervous in the trailer, and I was trying to act brave for both of us." She chuckled softly. "But the moment we entered that arena, it was like everything else disappeared. Just you and me." Starfire's ear twitched at the sound of her voice, and he let out a contented sigh. Sophia's hand moved to stroke his neck. "You've always been there, haven't you? Through Mom's illness, through all those times I wanted to quit." Her voice cracked slightly. "You never gave up on me." The stable door creaked open, and Maddie appeared, carrying a thick blanket. Without a word, she draped it over Sophia's shoulders and settled down beside her. For a while, they just sat there, watching Starfire doze. "Remember when he used to steal apples from the kitchen window?" Maddie asked softly. Sophia laughed despite herself. "Mom would get so mad, but she always made sure to leave a few extra out there for him anyway." The sisters shared a smile, and something in Sophia's chest loosened. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "I'm scared, Maddie," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know who I am without competing. Without him." She gestured toward Starfire. "It's been my whole life for so long." Maddie reached over and took her sister's hand. "You're still you, Soph. You're still the girl who used to spend hours brushing him just because you loved being near him. the one who could tell exactly what mood he was in just by looking at his ears. Tears welled up in Sophia's eyes. But what if? You don't have to figure it all out right now, Maddie interrupted gently. It's okay to just be here, with him, with this moment. Sophia squeezed her sister's hand, grateful for the simple comfort of her presence. They sat together in the growing darkness, listening to Starfire's steady breathing and the familiar sounds of the stable at night. For the first time in years, Sophia felt the walls she'd built around her heart begin to crumble. Later that night, as she walked back to her house, Sophia found herself thinking about the future differently. Not with the sharp focus of competition schedules and training regimens, but with something softer, something new beginning to take shape in her mind. The morning sun cast long shadows across the paddock as Dr. Lila's truck pulled up to the farm. Sophia stood by Starfire's stall, her hands fidgeting with his lead rope as she waited. The vet's expression was gentle but concerned as she approached. "How's our boy doing today?" Dr. Lila asked, setting down her medical bag. Sophia watched as the vet examined Starfire carefully. The horse stood quietly, his head lower than usual, sides moving with each labored breath. Dr. Lila's hands moved expertly over his body, checking vital signs and responses. "He's calm, which is good," Dr. Lila said finally, "but I can tell he's getting weaker. The condition is progressing faster than I initially thought." Sophia swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. Did I make it worse? With all the training?" Dr. Lila paused, considering her words carefully. "You know, I had a horse once. His name was Thunder." She stroked Starfire's neck as she spoke. "He was my competition partner, my whole world. I saw the signs that something wasn't right, but I ignored them. Kept pushing because we were so close to qualifying for nationals." Sophia watched as the vet's professional facade cracked slightly, revealing old pain beneath. "I lost him 2 days before the competition," Dr. Lila continued. "It took me years to forgive myself. That's actually why I became a vet. I wanted to help other horses, other riders, make better choices than I did." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Sophia felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "The thing is," Dr. Lila said, meeting Sophia's gaze, "beating yourself up won't help him now. What matters is how we make his remaining time comfortable and meaningful." Sophia nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Lila reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. "I've helped other families create memorials for their horses," she said softly. "Something to celebrate their life, not just mourn their passing. We could plan something special for Starfire. When—" She left the sentence unfinished. "I don't know if I'm ready to think about that," Sophia admitted. "That's okay, Doctor," Lila replied. "But remember, you have a choice here. You can focus on what you're losing, or you can celebrate everything he's given you. Either way, it's going to hurt. But one path leads to healing." Sophia looked at Starfire, who gazed back at her with those familiar gentle eyes. "Thank you," she whispered to Dr. Lila, though she wasn't sure yet if she could follow the vet's advice. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Maddie stood at Sophia's front door, 2 travel mugs of coffee in her hands. She found her sister exactly where she expected, in Starfire's stall. "Come on," Maddie said gently. "Let's take a walk. Just 30 minutes. Sophia shook her head. "I shouldn't leave him. Dr. Lila said he's stable right now, and you need fresh air." Maddie held out one of the mugs. "Just to the woods and back." Sophia hesitated, then reached for Starfire's worn leather halter hanging on the wall. She clutched it close to her chest, like a security blanket. "Okay," she whispered, "but just 30 minutes. The sisters walked in silence along the familiar trail that wound through the maple trees. Their boots crunched over fallen leaves, and the morning sun filtered through the branches above them. Sophia's fingers kept running over the smooth leather of the halter, tracing the brass buckles she'd adjusted countless times over the years. After a few minutes, Maddie cleared her throat. "I've been thinking, what if we did something special for Starfire?" Sophia tensed. "What do you mean?" "Maybe a small gathering. Nothing fancy. Just the people who've been part of your journey together. Remember Sarah from the feed store? And old Mr. Peterson who used to watch you practice? People who'd want to share their memories of him." "I don't know," Sophia said, her voice tight. "It feels wrong somehow, like we're planning a... She couldn't finish the sentence. Maddie touched her sister's arm. "It's not about saying goodbye. It's about celebrating him while he's still here to feel the love, to show him how many lives he's touched." They completed their loop back to the farm, and Sophia paused at the gate. Through the fence, she could see Starfire standing in his paddock, his head lifted slightly as he watched them approach. Inside the kitchen, Sophia pulled out a notepad and slowly wrote, "Starfire's Celebration" at the top. She added Sarah's name, then Mr. Peterson's. Coach Martinez, who'd guided them through their first championship. Little Emma from next door, who always brought Starfire carrots. As the list grew, something shifted in Sophia's chest. Not exactly happiness, but a warmth she hadn't felt in days. Maybe Maddie was right. Maybe sharing Starfire's story with others who loved him could help her find her way through this. She looked up at her sister. "Will you help me plan it?" Maddie smiled, tears in her eyes. "Of course I will." A week passed like a gentle breeze, and the morning sun found Sophia and Maddie working side by side in the stable. Maddie balanced on a ladder, carefully stringing white lights along the wooden beams, while Sophia swept the concrete floor below. "Be careful up there," Sophia called out, pausing to watch her sister work. "Always am," Maddie replied, securing another strand of lights. "Can you hand me those command hooks?" As they worked, Sophia noticed the care Maddie took with every detail. The way she arranged fresh hay in Starfire's stall, how she hung photos of their competitions along the walls, and even the special apple treats she'd baked that morning. The sight made Sophia's throat tight with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Sophia admitted quietly. Maddie climbed down from the ladder and squeezed her sister's hand. "That's what family's for." Throughout the afternoon, doubt crept into Sophia's mind like shadows lengthening across the paddock. She stood in the doorway, watching Starfire graze peacefully when Dr. Lila's truck pulled up. "Having second thoughts?" Lila asked, joining her at the entrance. Sophia nodded. "What if this is too much for him? What if Dash?" "Horses are incredibly perceptive," Lila interrupted gently. "They can sense love and joy just as clearly as fear or sadness. Tomorrow isn't just for the humans who love him, it's for Starfire too. He deserves to feel how many lives he's touched." As evening settled over the farm, the stable transformed into something magical. The string lights twinkled like stars, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden walls. Photos of Starfire's victories and quiet moments lined the space, telling the story of his life with Sophia. Sophia knelt beside Starfire in his freshly bedded stall, running her hand along his neck. The old horse's eyes were bright despite his weakness, and he leaned into her touch. "Tomorrow is for you, my friend," she whispered, pressing her forehead against his. Then she stood, gave him one last pat, and walked toward the house to prepare herself for what the next day would bring. The morning light painted golden streaks across the stable floor as Sophia carefully brushed Starfire's coat until it gleamed. Her hands moved with practiced gentleness, working out every tangle in his mane. She'd chosen his favorite halter, the deep blue one with silver accents that had always made him look so regal. "There you go, handsome," she murmured, stepping back to admire her work. Starfire responded by pressing his nose against her palm, his warm breath tickling her skin. His eyes, though tired, held the same kindness they always had. By mid-morning, familiar faces began arriving at the farm. Sarah, their first riding instructor, brought a collection of old ribbons they'd won together. Tom, the stable manager from their competition days, carried a photo album filled with snapshots from their early training sessions. "Remember when this guy decided to take an unplanned swim in Thompson Creek?" Tom laughed, pointing to a picture of a mud-covered Starfire. "Still won the cross-country that day." Maddie moved through the gathering like a guardian angel, making sure Sophia had moments to breathe between conversations. When tears threatened to overwhelm her sister, Maddie would appear with a glass of water or a gentle touch on the shoulder, steering the conversation toward happier memories. The afternoon sun was beginning to soften when something remarkable happened. Starfire, who had been standing quietly in the paddock surrounded by admirers, suddenly lifted his head. His ears pricked forward, and with a grace that defied his condition, he took several prancing steps, his hooves lifting high, just as they had in his show days. Everyone fell silent, then burst into cheers and applause. Some wiped away tears as they watched the old champion show his spirit one more time. Sophia's heart swelled with pride and love, even as she fought back tears of her own. As the gathering wound down and the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in pink and gold, Sophia led Starfire back to his stall. His steps were slower now, but he walked with dignity, his head still held high. "Maddie," Sophia called softly, turning to her sister who was collecting empty plates nearby. "Thank you for this, for everything. I didn't know how much I needed it until today." The morning after the gathering brought an unusual stillness to the farm. Sophia woke before her alarm, her heart heavy yet somehow lighter than it had been in weeks. The emotional weight of yesterday's celebration left her feeling drained, but strangely peaceful, like the calm after a storm. She pulled on her worn barn jacket and made her way to the stable in the pre-dawn darkness. The familiar scent of hay and horses greeted her as she settled onto the small wooden stool beside Starfire's stall. He acknowledged her with a soft nickering sound, his eyes bright despite the early hour. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the stable windows, painting golden strips across the floor, Sophia sat in comfortable silence with her old friend. The paddock outside gradually came into view as dawn broke, the grass still wet with dew. The crunch of footsteps on gravel announced Maddie's arrival. She appeared in the stable doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee, offering one to Sophia with a gentle smile. Without speaking, she pulled up another stool and sat beside her sister. They watched through the stable door as the other horses grazed in the distance, their shapes dark against the brightening sky. The sisters sipped their coffee in companionable silence, the events of yesterday's gathering still fresh in their minds. "How are you holding up?" Maddie finally asked, her voice soft and careful. Sophia took a long breath before answering, her fingers wrapped around the warm coffee mug. "I'm not ready," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know what's coming, but—" She glanced at Starfire, who stood quietly in his stall. "I don't think I'll ever really be ready to let him go." Maddie nodded, reaching over to squeeze her sister's hand. "I know. But I understand now that it's going to happen, whether I'm ready or not." Sophia's voice cracked slightly, but she managed a small smile. "Yesterday helped, seeing how many lives he touched." Setting down her empty coffee mug, Sophia stood up. I think I'll take him for a walk in the paddock. He always loved the morning grass. She opened the stall door and clipped a lead rope to Starfire's halter. His steps were measured and careful as they made their way outside, but his ears perked forward at the fresh morning air. Sophia kept pace with his slow progress, watching as he stopped occasionally to nibble at the dewy grass. The morning sun had fully risen now, warming their backs as they walked. Sophia observed Starfire's contentment, the way he savored each mouthful of grass, how his tail swished peacefully. Though her heart ached knowing their time was limited, she found joy in this simple moment, just the two of them, enjoying a quiet morning together. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the paddock when Sophia's phone rang. Dr. Lila's name flashed on the screen, and Sophia's stomach tightened as she answered. How's Starfire doing after yesterday's gathering? Dr. Lila asked, her voice warm but professional. Sophia watched Starfire through the stable window, her throat constricting. He seemed happy during the party. Everyone being there, all the attention. She paused, fighting back tears. But he's not better. If anything, he seems more tired today. Within an hour, Doctor. Lila's truck pulled up to the farm. She carried her medical bag into the stable, where Starfire stood quietly in his stall. Her examination was gentle but thorough, her experienced hands moving carefully over the horse's body while Sophia watched, hardly breathing. Finally, Dr. Lila straightened up and turned to face Sophia. His heart condition has progressed significantly, she said softly. At this point, our priority needs to be keeping him comfortable. I wish I had better news. Sophia's legs gave out, and she sank onto a hay bale, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I can't lose him, she choked out. Maddie, who had been hovering nearby, stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her sister. Starfire has trusted you with everything, she whispered, rubbing Sophia's back. He's always known you'd do what's best for him. This is the greatest act of love you can show him now. Hours passed as Sophia wrestled with the decision. The sun set, and darkness fell over the farm. Finally, with tears streaming down her face, she nodded to Dr. Lila, who had waited patiently. They scheduled the euthanasia for the next morning. That night, Sophia couldn't bear to leave Starfire alone. She spread clean straw in his stall and lay down beside him, her head resting against his warm neck. The stable was quiet, except for the soft sounds of horses breathing and the occasional rustle of hay. Remember our first competition? She whispered to Starfire, running her fingers through his mane. I was so nervous I could barely hold the reins. But you knew exactly what to do. She smiled through her tears. And that time we won the regional championship? Everyone said you were too young, but you proved them wrong. Her voice grew softer as she continued sharing memories. You were there when Dad died. I spent hours crying in your stall, and you just stood there with me, letting me lean on you. Starfire shifted slightly, lowering his head to nuzzle her hair. The night deepened, and Sophia's words became intermittent as exhaustion took over. She curled closer to Starfire's warmth, her hand still tangled in his mane, and finally drifted off to sleep against his neck. The morning dawned clear and crisp, painting the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold. Sophia's hands trembled as she clipped the lead rope to Starfire's halter. She'd barely slept, spending most of the night memorizing the sound of his breathing, the warmth of his presence. Come on, old friend, she whispered, her voice catching. Let's see the sunrise, one more time. Starfire followed her out of the stable, his steps slow but deliberate. Though his body showed the strain of his condition, his eyes remained bright and alert. The dewy grass sparkled beneath their feet as they made their way to the paddock, where the morning light painted everything in a soft, golden glow. Dr. Lila and Maddie stood at a respectful distance near the fence, their faces etched with sympathy. Maddie held a tissue to her eyes, while Dr. Lila kept her professional composure, though her eyes glistened. "Want to walk with me?" Sophia asked Starfire softly, gently tugging the lead rope. To her amazement, Starfire lifted his head and, with what seemed like enormous effort, broke into a trot. His movements weren't as smooth as they once were, but for a brief moment, she caught a glimpse of the champion he'd always been. Tears streamed freely down Sophia's face as she watched him move. His mane caught the morning light, dancing in the breeze just as it had during countless competitions. Despite his weakness, his spirit shone through in every step, in the proud arch of his neck, in the determination that had always defined him. In that moment, something shifted inside Sophia. The guilt she'd carried about pushing him too hard, about not noticing his condition sooner, began to fade. Starfire wasn't showing her his weakness. He was showing her his strength. Even now, facing his final hours, he was still teaching her about grace and courage. Sophia knelt beside him as he slowed, pressing her forehead against his. His warm breath tickled her face as she whispered, "Thank you for everything, my friend." She stood slowly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, and guided him back toward the stable. At the stable entrance, Starfire paused. The morning sun streamed through the doorway, surrounding him in golden light. He stood tall, his head held high, like a true champion, taking his final bow. The stable held its breath in the early morning light, each dust mote floating silently through golden beams. Sophia spread fresh hay across Starfire's stall, her movements careful and deliberate. She smoothed out his favorite blue blanket, the one he'd worn after so many victories, making sure every corner lay perfectly flat. Maddie worked quietly beside her, adjusting water buckets and checking feed bins. Neither sister spoke. Words seemed too heavy for this moment. The only sounds were their footsteps on the stable floor and the occasional soft nickering from other horses. When Dr. Lila's truck crunched up the gravel driveway, Sophia's hands froze mid-task. She drew a shaky breath, steadying herself against the stall door. Maddie's hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently. Dr. Lila entered the stable with quiet dignity, her medical bag held close. She gave Sophia a gentle nod, her eyes full of understanding. "Whenever you're ready," she said softly. Sophia clipped the lead rope to Starfire's halter with trembling fingers. He followed her willingly into the paddock, his steps slow but steady. The morning sun painted the fields in shades of gold and green, a gentle breeze rippling through the grass. Starfire lifted his head, nostrils flaring as he took in the familiar scents of his home. Kneeling beside him in the dewy grass, Sophia ran her fingers through his mane. The silky strands felt just as they had the first time she'd groomed him, all those years ago. "You've given me everything," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Every victory, every moment. It was all because of you, my friend." Dr. Lila approached quietly, syringe in hand. Sophia wrapped her arms around Starfire's neck, pressing her face against his warm coat. She could feel his steady heartbeat, the gentle rise and fall of his breath. As the injection took effect, his muscles gradually relaxed beneath her touch. Then came the stillness, profound and absolute. Sophia's tears fell freely as she clung to him, feeling the last warmth of his body. The morning seemed to pause, holding its breath in this moment of peaceful farewell. Maddie and Dr. Lila stood close by, their own tears falling silently. Together, they helped Sophia spread a clean white sheet over Starfire's still form. The fabric settled gently, outlining the proud shape of the champion who had given so much to so many. The oak tree, Sophia managed through her tears, gesturing toward the ancient tree that stood sentinel at the paddock's edge. He always loved the shade there in summer. The morning sun climbed higher as the sound of shovels broke the farm silence. Under the spreading oak tree, Maddie and 3 close friends worked steadily, their faces streaked with sweat and occasional tears. The rich earth piled up beside the deepening grave, dark and fresh against the green grass. Sophia sat on a nearby bench, watching the methodical work. The tree's leaves rustled above, casting dappled shadows that danced across the ground. She held a small wooden box in her lap, running her fingers over its smooth surface. "He loved this spot," whispered Jenny, one of their oldest friends from the competition circuit, pausing to lean on her shovel. "Remember how he'd always gravitate here after training?" Maddie nodded, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. "He'd stand right here, watching the sunset through these branches." When the grave was ready, Sophia approached slowly, clutching the wooden box. Inside lay a carefully braided strand of Starfire's mane, tied with the faded blue ribbon from their first championship win. The ribbon's gold letters had almost worn away, but first place, junior jumping, could still be read. Kneeling at the grave's edge, Sophia placed the box gently at the bottom. Her hands trembled as she arranged it just so, making sure it sat perfectly level. The others gathered around, forming a quiet circle of support. Maddie stepped forward, unfolding a piece of paper. Her voice was steady as she began to read. "For the heart that carried us, the spirit that lifted us, the friend who taught us, that love knows no bounds. Faithful companion, gentle warrior, rest now in peace." Sophia closed her eyes as Maddie's words washed over her. Each phrase brought forth a flood of memories: early morning training sessions, victory laps around countless arenas, quiet moments in the stable. She remembered how Starfire had stood by her through every triumph and disappointment, his steady presence a constant in her ever-changing world. As the others began filling the grave, Sophia remained rooted to the spot. She watched each shovelful of earth cover the wooden box, her throat tight with unshed tears. The work continued quietly, respectfully, until a small mound marked the spot where Starfire now rested. One by one, the friends squeezed Sophia's shoulder or offered a gentle hug before walking back toward the stable. Maddie lingered longest, then she too stepped away, leaving Sophia alone beneath the oak's protective canopy. Kneeling beside the fresh earth, Sophia placed her hand on the warm soil. "You showed me what it means to be strong," she whispered, "to keep going, to face each day with grace, no matter what comes." She took a deep breath, feeling the gentle breeze against her tear-stained cheeks. "I promise to live up to your example, my friend. I promise to make you proud." The farm felt different now, emptier, quieter. Each morning, Sophia found herself avoiding the window that overlooked Starfire's favorite paddock. Her coffee grew cold on the kitchen counter as she took longer routes around the property, skirting the places that held the strongest memories. "You don't have to rush anything," Maddie said one morning, watching her sister reorganize the feed room for the 3rd time that week. "Everyone heals differently." Sophia nodded, grateful for her sister's steady presence. "I know. It's just, everything reminds me of him." Later that afternoon, Sophia sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by photo albums and competition memorabilia. Her fingers traced the edge of a photograph showing Starfire mid-jump, his form perfect, mane flowing like liquid fire in the sunlight. Beside it lay a collection of ribbons, each one telling its own story of triumph and partnership. The mail arrived, and among the usual bills was a hand-addressed envelope. Inside, Sophia found a letter written in careful cursive. Dear Ms. Brooks, I'm Sarah, and I'm 12 years old. I saw Starfire compete 3 years ago at the regional championships. I'll never forget how beautiful he was, how he seemed to dance rather than run. Watching you two inspired me to start riding lessons. Now I have my own horse, and every time I ride, I think about how Starfire moved that day. Thank you for showing me what's possible when horse and rider trust each other completely. Tears splashed onto the paper as Sophia read. She hadn't known, couldn't have known, how many lives Starfire had touched beyond their immediate circle. The letter trembled in her hands as she read it again, remembering that particular competition, how proud she'd been of him that day. Rising from the floor, Sophia walked to her desk and pulled out her nicest stationery. She began writing a response to Sarah, sharing a special memory of Starfire's early training days. As she wrote, something shifted inside her, a tiny spark of purpose returning. When she finished the letter, Sophia stood before the bare wall of her living room. Starfire's halter hung from a hook in her hand, its leather worn smooth from years of use. With careful movements, she placed it in the shadow box she'd bought days ago, but hadn't been ready to use. The brass nameplate caught the afternoon light. Starfire, etched deep and permanent in the metal. The morning sun painted long shadows across Sophia's bedroom floor as she opened her eyes. Something felt different today. The heaviness that had settled in her chest since Starfire's passing seemed lighter, more bearable. She lay there for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of the farm coming to life. In the stable, Dakota nickered softly as Sophia approached with his halter. The young bay horse had always been gentle, patient. His dark eyes watched her curiously as she began to brush him, her hands remembering the familiar motions. "What do you say, boy?" she whispered, running her hand along his neck. "Ready for a morning ride?" The saddle felt both strange and familiar as she tightened the girth. Dakota stood quietly, his ears flicking back to listen to her movements. Mounting up, Sophia took a deep breath, letting the scents of leather and horse fill her lungs. They started slowly, walking along the fence line, where dew still sparkled on the grass. The steady clip-clop of Dakota's hooves settled into a rhythm that tugged at something deep in Sophia's heart. As they picked up a trot, the wind brushed against her face, and suddenly she was flooded with memories, not the painful ones she'd been avoiding, but the joyful ones. Starfire's powerful stride, his eager snorts on crisp morning rides, the way he'd always known exactly when to collect himself before a jump. To her surprise, these memories didn't bring tears. Instead, she felt a warmth spread through her chest, as if Starfire's spirit was there with her, showing her how to move forward. Dakota responded to her lightest touch, just as Starfire had taught her to expect from her horses. When they returned to the stable yard, Maddie was waiting by the fence. Her face broke into a wide smile as she watched Sophia dismount. "Look at you," Maddie said softly, pride evident in her voice. "I haven't seen you ride in weeks." Sophia patted Dakota's neck, letting out a long breath. It felt right today. And being up there, feeling the movement, it made me think about something. She began untacking Dakota, her movements deliberate. What if we started a foundation? In Starfire's name. A foundation? For retired competition horses, Sophia explained, her voice growing stronger with each word. So many of them don't get the care they deserve after their careers end. We could help provide medical care, comfortable retirement, make sure they're treated with dignity. Maddie stepped forward and squeezed her sister's arm. "I'm so proud of you, Soph. That sounds perfect. Sophia and Maddie sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of papers. Sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the scattered notes and hastily drawn diagrams. Sophia chewed on the end of her pencil, staring at the budget calculations she'd been working on. Maybe we're trying to do too much at once, Maddie suggested gently, sorting through the papers. What if we start smaller? Focus on partnering with 1 or 2 local centers first. Sophia nodded, crossing out several items on her list. You're right. We could start with medical care support and expand from there. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing again, her handwriting more focused and determined. Later that afternoon, Sophia visited Silver Creek Horse Rescue, a small but well-maintained facility just outside town. The manager, Beth, led her through the stables, explaining their daily operations and challenges. It's not just about food and shelter, Beth explained, stopping at one of the stalls. These horses need specialized care, especially the older ones who've spent years competing. Inside the stall stood Honey, a chestnut mare with gentle eyes and a graying muzzle. The horse lifted her head, regarding Sophia with quiet dignity. Something about her calm demeanor reminded Sophia so much of Starfire that her breath caught in her throat. She was a dressage champion, Beth said softly. Competed for 12 years before her owner couldn't afford her care anymore. Sophia reached out to stroke Honey's nose, feeling the velvet softness beneath her fingers. The mare leaned into her touch, just as Starfire used to do. This is exactly why we need the foundation, she whispered. Beth's eyes lit up when Sophia explained her plans. We'd love to partner with you. I can show you our care protocols, share our vendor contacts. Sometimes these horses just need someone to believe in them again. Back home that evening, Sophia sat at her desk, the day's experiences still fresh in her mind. She pulled out a piece of heavy cream-colored paper and carefully wrote out the Foundation's mission statement: to honor Starfire's legacy by providing love, care, and dignity to horses who gave their all. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the framed statement next to Starfire's shadow box, where his halter hung in quiet testament to their years together. The two pieces looked right together, like they belonged that way, one honoring the past, the other pointing toward the future. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Sophia hung the last banner for the Starfire Foundation's launch event. The white fabric fluttered against the blue sky, bearing the Foundation's logo, a silhouette of a horse in mid-stride, reminiscent of Starfire's graceful movement. The tables look perfect, Maddie called out, adjusting a framed photo of Starfire with his championship ribbons. She had arranged the displays with care, creating a timeline of Starfire's journey from young competitor to beloved champion. People began arriving, filling the farm with warm chatter and familiar faces. Dr. Lila was among the first, carrying a stack of informational pamphlets about senior horse care. The local riders, veterinarians, and horse enthusiasts mingled around the displays, studying the photos and sharing memories. "Remember this competition?" someone asked, pointing to a picture of Starfire clearing a jump. "He made it look so easy." Sophia nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "He always did." The presentation portion of the event began with Sophia stepping onto a small platform. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the microphone, but her voice was steady. "Welcome to the launch of the Starfire Foundation. This dream wouldn't exist without the incredible horse who inspired it." Dr. Lila's speech followed, drawing from her years of experience. "These magnificent animals give us their hearts," she said, her words touching everyone present. "The least we can do is ensure they live out their final years with dignity and care." The crowd nodded in agreement, and several people wiped away tears. Then came the surprise that left Sophia speechless. Martha Henderson, a local business owner and longtime supporter of equestrian sports, stood up. "I'd like to pledge $50,000 to get this foundation started," Martha announced. "Starfire's story moved me, and I believe in what you're building here, Sophia." The crowd burst into applause. Maddie squeezed Sophia's hand, both sisters fighting back tears. As the sun began to set, the last guests said their goodbyes, leaving behind promises of support and collaboration. Sophia walked to the paddock fence, hoisting herself up to sit on the wooden rail. She watched the young horses grazing in the golden light, their movements peaceful and unhurried. Maddie joined her, bumping her shoulder playfully against Sophia's. "You did it, sis. Starfire would be proud." "We did it," Sophia corrected her, looking at her sister with gratitude. "I couldn't have made it through any of this without you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the horses. For the first time since losing Starfire, Sophia felt truly at peace. The ache in her heart hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something meaningful, a purpose that would help other horses and their owners find dignity in their twilight years. The crisp morning air filled the indoor arena as Sophia watched Ellie circle her horse, Snow, at a steady trot. Something about the young rider's determination reminded Sophia of herself at 15, eager to prove herself, but weighted down by self-doubt. "Keep your shoulders back," Sophia called out, noting how Ellie immediately adjusted her posture. "That's it. Now ask for the canter." Ellie's hands trembled slightly as she gave the signal. Snow responded, but the transition was rough, causing Ellie to bounce in the saddle. "I'm sorry," Ellie mumbled, her cheeks flushing red. "I keep messing up." "Whoa," Sophia said softly, walking to the center of the arena. "Bring him in." As Ellie guided Snow to a halt, Sophia noticed the girl's hands shaking. "What's really going on, Ellie?" Tears welled up in Ellie's eyes. "The show next weekend. I'm terrified I'll fail. Everyone will be watching. And I don't want to let anyone down." Sophia's heart squeezed with recognition. She gestured for Ellie to dismount, and they sat together on a mounting block. "You know, I used to feel exactly the same way," Sophia said, watching Snow nuzzle Ellie's shoulder. "Before my first big competition with Starfire, I was so scared I could barely eat." "Really?" Ellie looked up, surprised. "But you were amazing together." Sophia smiled. "We were, but not because we won every ribbon. It was because we trusted each other." She stood up and walked to her tack room, returning with a worn navy blue saddle pad. This was Starfire's. He wore it during our first championship. Ellie's eyes widened as Sophia handed it to her. "I can't take this. It's too special." "You're not taking it, you're borrowing it," Sophia explained. "Sometimes we all need a reminder that greatness comes from trust, not perfection." They replaced Snow's saddle pad with Starfire's, and Ellie mounted again. This time, when she asked for the canter, Snow transitioned smoothly, their movements in perfect harmony. The following weekend, Sophia stood at the rail of the show ring, watching Ellie and Snow enter for their class. The navy blue pad stood out against Snow's dappled gray coat, and Ellie sat tall in the saddle, her chin held high. Their round wasn't perfect. They had one tight turn that cost them points, but the partnership between horse and rider shone through. When the announcer called their name for third place, Ellie's smile lit up the arena. After the ribbon ceremony, Ellie ran to Sophia, still clutching her yellow ribbon. "Thank you," she said, throwing her arms around her mentor. "Not just for the training, but for showing me what really matters. You're such an inspiration." Sophia hugged her back, feeling a familiar warmth in her chest. The same feeling she used to get when Starfire would nuzzle her shoulder after a good ride. In helping Ellie find her confidence, she discovered a new way to honor Starfire's memory, by passing on the lessons he'd taught her about trust, perseverance, and the pure joy of riding. The early morning mist clung to the grass as Sophia and Maddie made their way to the oak tree. 1 year had passed since they'd laid Starfire to rest beneath its spreading branches, but the memories felt as fresh as yesterday. Sophia knelt and placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave. Maddie stood beside her, holding a worn blue ribbon from their first championship. "I can't believe it's been a year," Maddie said softly, touching the smooth bark of the oak. "Sometimes I still expect to hear him nickering in the morning," Sophia admitted, running her fingers through the dewy grass. "But it's different now. The missing doesn't hurt like it used to." Maddie smiled, watching as Sophia traced the outline of the small stone marker they'd placed. "You've done so much with the foundation. He'd be proud." Rising from the grave, Sophia brushed off her jeans and headed to the stable. Dakota stood waiting, already tacked up for their morning ride. His coat gleamed in the early light, rich brown and full of life. As they set off across the fields, Dakota's stride fell into an easy rhythm. The steady beat of hooves against earth brought back countless memories of morning rides with Starfire. But today, those memories carried warmth instead of sadness. Sophia let Dakota choose their path, following the fence line and then cutting across the back pasture. She wasn't counting strides or planning turns. Instead, she focused on the wind in her hair and the pure joy of movement. "You taught me this," she whispered, thinking of Starfire. "That riding isn't about ribbons or scores. It's about trust and connection." Dakota's ears flicked back at her voice, and he picked up a willing canter. Sophia laughed, letting him stretch out across the open field. This was what she'd been missing in all those years of intense competition, the simple pleasure of partnership. When they returned to the paddock, Ellie was already there, filling water buckets and checking on the horses. She waved as Sophia dismounted. "How was your ride?" Ellie asked, pausing in her chores. "Perfect," Sophia replied, giving Dakota an appreciative pat. "Just perfect." Together, they watched as the horses grazed beneath the oak tree, their tails swishing in the golden evening light. The setting sun cast long shadows across Starfire's grave, where the morning's flowers lay bright against the grass. If you enjoyed the story of Starfire, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.